silence don't like them, but I see you all the time. Fix it. Silence don't like them, but I see you all the time.
Hey everyone, so my name is Allie and welcome to my channel. So if you watched back a few videos ago, I talked about reading books while listening to music. So I thought it'd be fun to take a few of the books I've read before and talk about the music that I listened to while I was reading those books. So the first book I have on this list is And I Darken by Kiersten White. And when I read this book, I listened to Reputation by Taylor Swift. So I decided to listen to Reputation by Taylor Swift because when I ended up reading this book, it was around the time that album had come out and I wasn't really listening to anything else at the time. So normally when I read either historical fiction or fantasy, I usually tend to go with different scores of movies because I feel like that really works for both historical fiction and fantasy because I need a lot of my attention for both of those genres. So I tend to get a little distracted when I hear lyrics and I'm trying to read something that's really deep or needs a lot of my attention. But because I was kind of obsessed with Reputation at the time, I ended up listening to that while I was reading this book, and it really worked in my favor. Reputation as an album kind of shows a darker side of Taylor Swift, and this is definitely a pretty dark and twisted book. So I felt like the two moods of this book and the album, I just feel like those work so well together, and I can't imagine a better album to pair with this book. The next book I have is Labyrinth Lost by Zoraida Cordova, and the album that I listened to while I was reading this book was A Nation of Two by Vance Joy. So similarly with And I Darken, the Vance Joy album came out around the same time when I started to read this book. So I love Vance Joy, and I didn't really think I was going to actually listen to the album, but I ended up listening to it and I absolutely loved it so much. Saturday Sun is my jam. That is my ultimate jam. It's amazing. Go listen to it if you haven't. Saturday Sun is literally the best song on the album. It gives me so many feels. And for some reason, I felt like it'd be a good idea to listen to Vance Joy while reading this book. I don't know why. I don't know what my thought process was when I was deciding what to listen to while reading this book, but Vance Joy, A Nation of Two, just really spoke to me, and I'm like, you know what? Let's give it a go, let's read it, let's listen to it, and we'll see how I feel. Because sometimes I do switch up my music in the middle of reading a book, but for the most part, if I stick with something in the beginning, it's gonna stick with it till the end. And thankfully, that album ended up being absolutely perfect for this book. Whenever I hear Saturday Sun, I just think of Labyrinth Lost. And I don't know why, because it's not really the kind of genre that I would have picked for this book. I feel like this book I could have totally listened to something a little bit darker or just a little bit more fantasy oriented, and Vance Joy is something I would normally listen to while reading a contemporary. However, this just ended up working so perfectly. I feel like A Nation of Two is really a magical album, and it has some really great sounds that work really well for the magic that's in Labyrinth Lost. So sometimes musical inspiration for my reading just comes in a really weird place, somewhere that I would have never expected, and this ended up happening with A Nation of Two by Vance Joy and this book. The next book I have is Bring Me Their Hearts by Sarah Wolf, and when I was reading this book, I was also listening to Castles by Lissy. So again, around the same time I was reading this book, I discovered the album Castles by Lissy when I think I was at Starbucks, and one of the songs came on and I absolutely loved it, and so I just ended up listening to the whole album, which is something I don't normally do. I kind of hate starting new albums because it just, I don't know, it gives me really bad anxiety for some reason, but I ended up listening to Castles, and that is one of my all-time favorite albums now. And funny enough, this is also one of my new favorite fantasies. So I ended up reading this book while listening to that album. I normally go for movie scores. So when I ended up reading this book and listening to Castles, it just kind of blew my mind. It ended up working so perfectly, and I feel like the content on Castles really works well for the emotions and the content that are in Bring Me Their Hearts. It just ended up working really perfectly. Even the title song Castles is just absolutely perfect for this book, and surprisingly it works well for a lot of other fantasies too. The next book I have is A Study in Charlotte by Brittany Cavallaro, and when I was reading this book, I was listening to The Morning by Lewis Watson. So I know a lot of people that watch me or follow me on Twitter also enjoy Lewis Louis Watson's music, so this will come as no surprise. And I absolutely love that album, The Morning. It's kind of like a lot of his songs. It's a little bit of a collection album, and it's just so perfect. Like the mood of that album, his voice, and I feel like it really works to listen to a male singer when reading a book with a male point of view. I don't know, it just works well for me. And it just ended up elevating this book so well, and it fit the mood so perfectly. So if you've never listened to Louis Watson, his music's a little more acoustic, a little more indie, folksy kind of music, and it is just so atmospheric and beautiful. And I feel like his music also works well for a lot of different kinds of books. So yeah, I definitely recommend trying out Louis Watson's music, if not for A Study in Charlotte, then for some other book, because it just works so perfectly. It's just so beautiful. But I definitely recommend The Morning for more like fall and winter books. And then yeah, so definitely recommend those two. They go together really well. So this one is kind of my favorite pairing, and it's also sort of like the most perfect pairing out of all of these, and that is Red by Taylor Swift and Everything Leads to You by Nina LaCour. So if you know me, then you know that Everything Leads to You is one of my all-time favorite books. And when I was reading this book, Red by Taylor Swift had just recently come out. So I was also listening to that a lot, and it just ended up working so perfectly for the mood of this book, and it just created this atmosphere that really made it feel like you were inside the story. And I feel like a lot of the themes in Red are about fame and love, and this is also kind of about fame and love. Maybe less so fame and more just Hollywood in general, and I feel like that works well for both the album and the book. So yeah, this is definitely my favorite pairing out of all of these. And if you haven't read this book, then I definitely recommend you listen to Red by Taylor Swift. And actually Taylor Swift's albums, especially anything before Reputation, works so well for contemporary. It's just absolutely perfect. The next book is one that I read very recently, and that is The Diviners by Libba Bray, and I listened to the playlist Jazz for Fall from Spotify, and that ended up working so perfectly. I did try to listen to a few playlists that were meant for the originals, but that didn't really end up working for me because I just didn't want anything that had lyrics in it. So I looked through some of the jazz playlists, and the one for Autumn just worked so well. It was exactly what I was looking for, and it ended up just making this book feel so much more real and so much more like I was in the story. I feel like that's what music should do for a book, is elevate it and put the person that's reading it into the story. But I think once you find like the right album or the right genre or the right playlist, it's really going to elevate your reading experience, and I don't think you're gonna regret it. I don't know. I think that everyone could totally listen to music while reading. I mean, some people probably couldn't, but I feel like sometimes it just takes the right album. And the very last book that I have is The Wicked Deep by Shea Ernshaw, and while I was reading this book, I was also listening to If You Wait by London Grammar. So if you follow me on Twitter or Instagram, then you'll know how much I freaking love London Grammar. It's like the perfect music for fall and winter, and it just puts you in that mood, that gloomy mood, and oh, it's just so wonderful. It's just so beautiful. So this is also kind of like a gloomy sort of book, and I feel like If You Wait by London Grammar worked so perfectly. I actually kind of listened to both albums, but If You Wait was the one that I kind of was drawn to the most while reading this book. So yeah, I definitely feel like that worked really well for the mood of this book. And the lead singer's voice in London Grammar is just so hauntingly beautiful, and this is kind of hauntingly beautiful. So as you can see, it just kind of works well together. It's a great pairing. It's another one of those perfect pairings where it's just like it's a match made in heaven, and once it like kind of comes together, it's like the angels sing. So yeah, it's definitely one that I recommend to listen to while reading this book. So just for some like kind of more general recommendations for listening to music while reading, I wrote down a few different things that I like to listen to, especially while reading either historical fiction, sci-fi, or fantasy. So for sci-fi and fantasy, I have the Star Wars score. Any of them, especially Rogue One, Episode 1, and Episode 6, I would say are my three favorites. I do also like episode 2 and 3 scores as well, but 1 and Rogue One are like kind of my favorite ones. So if you don't know, Star Wars The Phantom Menace is episode 1, so if you go look for that on Spotify, you'll find it. And then Rogue One is a Star Wars story, and that one has such a beautiful score. It is just breathtaking, and it works so well for any sci-fi or fantasy. And then I have a few for historical fiction, and that would be the Little Women score from 1994. So just the 1994 version, because that score is one of the most beautiful scores that you will ever listen to. It is just gorgeous. It is beautiful, lush, and just it really puts you right into that mood. Like, it's so perfect for the 19th century, so it's just like it's so good. If you haven't seen that movie, go watch it. If you haven't listened to the score, go listen to it. It is absolutely freaking perfect. The next one is the Anna Karenina score, and then also the Hamlet score, and also the Cinderella score. And I'm talking about the Cinderella that was done by Kenneth Branagh, the newest one, the live action one. Perfect score, absolutely gorgeous, really good for any sort of fantasy or historical fiction, especially if it has to do with a princess. I think it works really well. So yeah, those are definitely a few of my favorite scores, even just to listen to in general. Like the Anna Karenina score is, it is one of my all-time favorites. It's just so beautiful, and is so good to write to as well. So if you're looking for music to write to, scores are also really good, because I feel like that gets your kind of creative juices flowing, because it's, you know, you're thinking of a movie, and I think it's good to kind of think of your book as a movie as well to get any sort of like creativity going. And yeah, so I hope those recommendations helped you guys out if you do listen to music while reading, because I know a lot of you don't. From my last video, a lot of you guys said that you don't really listen to music while reading, and that's totally fine. But for those of you who do, these are some recommendations. Or if you're looking to kind of incorporate some music into your reading, these will also be really helpful. And I hope you guys enjoyed this video, and if you did, go ahead and give it a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel. Also, thank you guys so much for 2,000 subscribers. It really means a lot to me. I am so thankful for you guys, and you guys watching my videos and caring about that and caring about the things that I have to say. It really means a lot, and I really appreciate it. So thank you guys again. And go ahead and follow me on Twitter, Instagram, go friend me on Goodreads, and I will see you guys in my next video. Bye!
time.